Dan McClellan is a liar.
All right, let's see it.
He claims that in Genesis 14, verse 22, in the Septuagint, that it doesn't have the phrase that Yahweh is El Elyon.
Before we get too deep into this video, I want to jump in here and make a clarification. The fact that the ancient Greek translation of Genesis 14:22 and the Genesis Apocryphon and the Peshitta don't include a reference to the Tetragrammaton doesn't in and of itself prove anything about an original distinction between Adonai and Elyon. I am not arguing that the absence of the Tetragrammaton in Genesis 14:22 means that Adonai was originally a distinct deity from Elyon. I'm pointing out this fact in response to the claim that the presence of the Tetragrammaton in MT, Genesis 14:22, somehow disproves an original distinction between Adonai and Elyon. I'm just complicating that argument by pointing out that the presence of the Tetragrammaton is secondary, that it is likely not original to the text, which only complicates the argument against which I am responding. It does not prove anything in and of itself.
Genesis 14 and verse 22, it reads, "And Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I will stretch out my hand to the Lord, the Most High God." Okay, so here's 22. And right here, this is the word for krios, ton theon. Ton is pronounced hypsistos, which means the Most High. So this is the Lord, the Most High God. The Septuagint translates Yahweh as Kyrios or ton theon. Kyrios means Lord, ton theon means the God.
Well, there's your problem. You're relying uncritically on Brenton, a mid-19th century English translation of the Septuagint that sometimes played fast and loose with its sources. Now, Brenton overwhelmingly used Codex Vaticanus as the source text for his English translation. And we can look at Codex Vaticanus. Here is the relevant part of Genesis 14:22. And this is a rather idiosyncratic scribal hand, but if you look at the very center of the red box, you see what looks like a big G and an S and then TOV. That's the end of pros and the beginning of ton, the article that goes with theon. Now, we only have the theta and the nu. This is a nomen sacrum. This is an abbreviation of references to deity and things like that. It has a horizontal line over the top of it. And so the red box is around the phrase, I will lift up my hand to the God Most High, ton theon, ton hypsiston. So the word Kyrios is not in Codex Vaticanus. So where did Brenton get it from? Well, we can look in other critical editions of the Septuagint. Here's Ralph's edition, which is considered more authoritative, and you see down at the bottom in the red box, pros ton theon ton hypsiston. There's no Kyrios. If we want more detail, we can look in Weaver's 1974 Göttingen edition of the Septuagint of Genesis, and we see the same, pros ton theon ton hypsiston, no Kyrios. But we can look at the red box in the critical apparatus, and you can see that we have a nomen sacrum for Kyrion, the accusative form of Kyrios, that has been added before theon in a handful of very late manuscripts. In fact, the fact that they're using a nomen sacrum indicates this is a Christian version of the Septuagint. So these are later manuscripts of the Septuagint. These are not the earliest, these are not the most reliable, and we can go check out Weaver's notes on the Greek text of Genesis for more discussion. In the red box here we have in MT, the action is directed El Adonai, El Elyon. Adonai and El Elyon become one, but Genesis, supported by Peshitta, simply has pros ton theon ton hypsiston, i.e. Abram's oath is taken in the name of Melchizedek's God, God Most High, rather than of his own God, the Lord. It should be noted that Samaritan Pentateuch, abbreviated here as Sam, also avoids reference to the Tetragrammaton, for which he substituted Ha Elohim. In the tradition, the Z plus text, so that's that handful of manuscripts that's listed in the critical apparatus, has added Kyrion after pros, which equals MT. The shorter text may have been promoted by the wish not to name Israel's God Adonai as identical with El Elyon, whose priest Melchizedek was. On the other hand, it is equally possible that MT represents a later attempt at deliberate syncretism of the two names, though the Samaritan Pentateuch's text seems to support the opposite trend. The full formula, the Most High God who created the heavens and the earth, obtains here exactly as in verse 19, which see. So what Weavers is pointing out is that the earliest and the most reliable manuscripts, as well as Peshitta and even the Samaritan Pentateuch, don't have the Tetragrammaton there. Now, the argument for why it's not there in the earliest manuscripts is a separate argument, but it's not there in the earliest manuscripts, which is why most modern English translations of the Septuagint omit it. For instance, we can look at the New English translation of the Septuagint, which came out in 2010, and Rob Hebert was responsible for translating Genesis. And you can see in the red box, Abram said to the king of Sodom, I will extend my hand to God Most High, who created the sky and the earth. So, the only reason you are confused here is because you're not aware of the origins, the methodologies, the presuppositions, the limits of the resources to which you're appealing. And you're appealing to a phenomenally outdated and inferior resource. If you got to know the Septuagint and scholarship about the Septuagint any better, you would see that the overwhelming majority of scholars agree that the Tetragrammaton in Genesis 14:22 in the Masoretic text is a secondary addition. It's not in the Septuagint, it's not in the Peshitta, it's not in the Genesis Apocryphon manuscripts that were discovered at Qumran. It's not even in the Samaritan Pentateuch, although they have Ha Elohim there instead. So I'm not lying, you just don't know what you're talking about.
Google confirms that this is what it says in the Septuagint, and that it does mean that Yahweh is El Elyon.
So in addition to the fact that you wildly misspelled the word Septuagint in your query, and clearly don't know anything about textual criticism of the Septuagint or the Greek of the Septuagint, you're now trying to retreat to AI to try to prove your point for you, when these large language models probably don't have any access to any of the real scholarship on the textual criticism of the Septuagint and are just going to go out and find what the internet is saying without interrogating the quality of the sources of those sayings. This is pretty naive and pretty bad apologetics. I would recommend you take some time to get better acquainted with your resources, with their methodologies, with the sources they use, and go out and actually read some of the scholarship and get better acquainted with the field of the textual criticism of the Septuagint before you start trying to challenge people in public who know these issues far better than you do. And the fit for this video has been Jurasisic Parak.